We'll go ahead and call to order the October 19th, 2022 Longmont Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Next order of business is roll call. Okay. Oh. Isn't that turning it? Mic on, right? Mic on.
Does the arrow key give you any other ideas?
Highlight. Mic on.
Dead like. It's supposed to on green, right? Oh, well, we'll just have to speak loud. And they should go to red if we're on, right?
Can you turn the whole system on?
Try it one more time. Okay. Hold with us. We're having a little technical difficulty.
I think you did it.
Something.
If I don't turn myself off, then I can turn somebody on.
Okay.
Yeah, do it.
We're gonna have to do that.
Verbally.
Yeah.
Now they're not.
Okay, we're good to go. Are you ready? Yeah, are you ready? Okay. Sorry for the delay. Chairman Poland? Here. Vice Chairman Goldberg? Here. Commissioner Flagg? Here. Commissioner Boone? Here. Councilmember Rodriguez? Here. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Awesome. Okay, we'll get through this. Next item is communications from Planning Director Glenn Van Nemwegen.
Aha. The only thing I have, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, is I do want to introduce our newest staff member, Ayanna Reed, who is in the back with the group of engineers back there. Ayanna Reed joined us in May. She's an associate planner. And I'm sure in a future agenda, you will see her up front in person. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Welcome, Ayanna. Next item is public comment. This is for items that are not on the agenda for today. Jane is going out to get the list. Okay, the first person is Michelle Bennett. Please come up. You have 5 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record.
I have to turn them on. There we go. Good evening. My name is Michelle Bennett, and I reside at 203 Francis Street. I came here today to kind of talk about emergency management, and so I hope that you'll bear with my little visual scenario. When I was a little girl, I remember when the fireman used to come into the school, and he used to teach us about home safety and, you know, drop and roll and that kind of stuff, and how many exits you need, or how to get out of your house, how to have a home plan, maybe a map. And I took that to heart, and I think that, you know, goes for most people who have children, that that they learn how to exit from their home in case of an emergency. And so, you know, and if one exit doesn't work, that there's a backup plan, or a place to meet, or a place where, you know, that you're going to be safe until the disaster emergency is open. So when we built a bedroom in our basement, we followed a building code for an egress window that would allow for a fireman and all his equipment to fit through that window in case there was an emergency in the basement. Did we ever have a fire in our home? No. Was this important to know? Yes. Okay, yes. So my question is, does the city have an evacuation plan? Have they educated the residents of what to do in an emergency? We have all witnessed natural disasters such as fires and floods. We know that mass shootings occur now to a point where we've become numb to it. Understand that the management is a mesh of systems. When there is an emergency, I understand that. And that a lot of people, different people are involved, but I don't think we're educating the community. And we all know that fires, floods, mass shootings happen. There exists in Longmont, which I just recently found out, an Office of Emergency Management in Longmont that will educate citizens on how to evacuate in an emergency, but most citizens in neighborhoods don't know about this. The reason this concerns me, besides the obvious, is Longmont seems to want to fill in dead spots with high-density housing and event centers, building upon existing infrastructures that can barely contain its own traffic problems, let alone be able to exit in an emergency event. The OEM needs to be more of a part of new development that are being placed inside these moderately dense neighborhoods. What happens when there is a need for a mass evacuation, when the developer squeezes themselves into these small dead spots without consideration for the neighbors that are around them? What happens in an emergency then? So in a mass evacuation, can the firemen and the emergency units fit through the window of these new developments and the neighboring homes around them? I think we need to all really start considering that and making OEM part of the development process. Thank you.
Next person on the list is Chris Conklin.
Good evening. My name is Chris Conklin. I live at 234 Francis. I know you're very busy. You have a lot on your plates, and maybe you're not even familiar with the proposed development at the Bond Farm, 1313 Spruce, but you are familiar with the procedure, which is the very first pre-app thing is this neighborhood meeting. Well, we had such a neighborhood meeting exactly 21 days after the letter went out about it. What bothered me was this meeting was held online. Why it wasn't held in here like you guys have it and like the city council has it is beyond me. So 60 people plus were on the screen, you know, in the YouTube. Out of those 60 people, 19, I counted them, got to call in because the procedure to call in was very unclear. A lot of people couldn't get in. I couldn't get in. I don't have a hard number of how many exactly did, but I know quite a few. So my question and my concern is, in the future, why don't you hold these meetings in situ, like in the chambers here? And I would go further to request that you reconvene a meeting of the Bond Farm neighborhood, because while you fulfilled the letter of the requirement, I don't think the spirit of the requirement was filled, because the spirit of the requirement would give voice to the very people that this impacted the most, whatever they're, you know, whatever, if they have concerns, approval, whatever. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris Conklin. The next person on the list is John Loughran.
Hello, my name is John Loughran. I live at 220 Sherman Street. And I also wanted to just bring some concerns about the preliminary design from the Bond Farm neighborhood. My house is built around 1900, and the street was designed around that same time. I have a horse tie, a stone and a steel ring in front of my house. And I imagine that was the traffic flow at that time was not very much, but it's expanded. Recently, when there was a construction on 3rd, people were detoured down Sherman Street, and it was pretty fast and furious down there. When I waved somebody, you know, like, hey, slow down a little bit, I got the finger, and the person sped up. So that's the current reality that we live in. As the preliminary design shows that all the traffic flowing from the north end of the city would flow down Sherman Street into the main entrance of the design, into the project. The previous design for that site had the intersections offset so that the traffic flow would be more evenly distributed and that people would have to like slow down and maybe take a different route. But right now, the main egress would be via Sherman. And also, people coming from the west on Spruce would be turning in at that intersection on Sherman and Spruce, which does not have very good visibility. So you're kind of, one has a big wall, one has a bush, so, and it's coming down the hill. So how do you rectify those things? So you could make a great, beautiful LEED building in there and have the latest technology, but we're still dealing with the traffic configurations and structure that is pre-existing. So anyway, I would just urge you folks to please to require that the developer address and make a safe and equitable traffic flow plan before you even bring that, you know, proposal for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Scott Stewart.
Thank you, committee members, council members. Scott Stewart, 229 Grant Street. Actually here to speak a little bit about West Side Tavern and the impact that it has on the surrounding homes. West Side Tavern, the building sits within a residential zoned area and is being used as a commercial building as it has been for the past 100+ years. The building has an historical exemption to the zoning requirements. The building and the business that have occupied it for over 100 years have existed without conflict to the surrounding homes until recently being the most recent owner. The building operator has modified the on-site parking, which pushes employees and customers into the surrounding neighborhood. This does not align with the intent of the zoning of all of the surrounding properties. It is to the benefit of that single property. The historical communication between the city and the former owner of this property illustrates an awareness that the property was underparked and it was unlikely that a seating expansion was unlikely to be approved. This is between Richards and Eva? She was a previous employee of the city. The increased seating capacity of for the former owner or for the former operator, the increase in seating capacity from the former operator is not in alignment with the historical use of this property. This causes business customers to be forced into the residential side streets. I'd like to encourage you guys, because you have the right to, review what has been asked for and what has been approved and what is actually going on now. There was, just take the drawing and go walk the property. He gets approval and then does what he wants. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Karen Modafferi. Did I get that right? Yes, but I'm going to pass it this time. Okay, thank you. And does anybody else in the audience wish to come up and speak to something that is not on today's agenda? If not, I will go ahead and close the public invited to be heard. The next item is approval of the minutes for the September 21st, 2022 meeting. Do we have any comments, questions, motions? Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd like to move to approve the September 21st minutes.
Okay, we have a motion to approve.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Boone. We have a motion to approve and a second. Without any other comments or questions, Jane, let's take a vote. Oh.
Vice Chairman Goldberg? Yes. Chairman Poland? Yes. Commissioner Flagg? Yes. Commissioner Boone? Yes. Chairman, that passes unanimously 4-0.
Thank you, Jane. The next item is the public hearing item 6, which is the Villas at Spring Valley preliminary plat. Planner Zach. I had this brought up so I could not have to look through this. Blazek presenting.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. Zach Blazek, Environmental Sustainability Planner with the city, here once again. This evening to discuss the Villas at Spring Valley preliminary subdivision plat. So the property we're talking about this evening is at the southwest corner of Highway 66 and Sundance Drive. It's currently vacant, 3.27 acres, zoned residential mixed neighborhood, and designated by our comprehensive plan as mixed neighborhood residential. The surrounding land uses: to the west, we have the Ute Creek Golf Course, and directly to the west is the Ute Creek Golf Course Maintenance Facility. To the south and to the east, we have single-family residential, and to the north, we have Highway 66, and just beyond that is unincorporated county. Again, we're zoned residential mixed neighborhood. The original concept plan from 1999 called for 24 townhome lots, and you can see that concept up on your screen. That was with PUD R2 zoning, or at the time what was medium residential. In the current zoning district, we allow a maximum density of up to 18 dwelling units per acre. This project proposes 8 dwelling units per acre. Again, at 3.27 acres, they're allowed up to 58 dwelling units under the current zoning. This project proposes 28 dwelling units. So the request is for a preliminary plat of 28 residential lots for paired homes. So that'll be 2 lots to each one building. The lots range from 2,000 square feet in area to just under 3,000 square feet. In addition to the lots, we're looking at 17,000-ish square feet for a street that connects to Sundance Drive. At the end of that street is Tract A, which is a connection to the golf course maintenance facility. In addition to that, there's an open space tract going down the center. There's a landscape buffer area up to the north along Highway 66, and there is an internal tract, which is like the alley that they'll use for internal circulation. Public outreach on this project, we had a virtual neighborhood meeting in September of 21. There were 3 attendees. In November of 21, we sent the notice of application for development. We did get comments from 16 members of the public on this notice. Most of the concerns, the vast majority of them, were specific to traffic impacts from the project. We again noticed on the public hearing in October earlier this month, and with that notice, we did not receive any written comments from members of the public. Development considerations from staff, we did find that the project meets the review criteria for a preliminary subdivision plat. The minimum standards for lot width are met. We don't actually have a lot standard for area in this zone district for this use. The proposed density aligns with the zoning, the comprehensive plan, and again, just to mention, with the previous original concept plan. On the site, there's no federal or state protected species. I did want to mention that there are a couple of raptor nests in the vicinity. One is an inactive osprey nest, the other is a red-tailed hawk that the species and habitat report didn't have any issues with or didn't expect any impacts. The other thing is that there is inactive prairie dog habitat on the site, so if they develop between March and November, they'll have to provide a nest survey prior to coming in. As always, you have 3 options to vote on this evening. The first is to vote to approve the Villas at Spring Valley preliminary subdivision plat. You can vote to approve with conditions, or you can vote to deny. This evening, staff is making the recommendation to vote to approve PZ Resolution 2022-10A to approve the Villas at Spring Valley preliminary subdivision plat. And that is the end of my show. I'll call on the applicants to come up and speak next. And I will pull up their slides. How's it going?
Hello, can everybody hear me? My name is Joey Reel. I'm here representing Prosper Land and Development. We are the developer. We're Seems like it.
You want to do them in person?
Okay. Commissioners, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Joey Reel. I'm here representing Prosper Land and Development. We are the developer. We're located at 428 Kimbark Street here in Longmont. You'll have to bear with me a little bit. Typically, I let the experts present for me, but our planner is a little bit under the weather this evening, so if she has to get up here and answer any questions, please go easy on her. That's Karen Henry with Henry Design Group. We also have Daniel Madruga here with Atwell Engineering. He's the project engineer. Just a little bit about Prosper. We are a small local development company right here in Longmont. We've got a couple owners who own the development company jointly, and we've got 2 employees. So we're very small, we're all local, we're all Colorado residents, we all live in the area. So we really pride ourselves in doing small projects, doing really high quality projects, and just not really doing too many lots in a year. So a lot of this is stuff that Zach has already covered, so I'll try to make this as brief as possible for information that we've already gone over. As you can see here, we have another vicinity map for the site located at the southwest corner of Highway 66 and Sundance Drive. Again, adjacent land uses, incorporated Boulder County, agricultural to the north across Highway 66. On the west side, we have the Ute Creek Golf Course and the maintenance facility, and to the south and to the east are single family in Providence and Spring Valley. So the existing site conditions at the location right now, the site is 3.27 acres, currently undeveloped property, mostly unkept, covered in prairie grasses. As Zach said, there was an inactive prairie dog colony that was found. No mitigation was required except for the burrow owl nest study if we happen to develop between March and November. Going into the property, there's Arrow Court from Spring Valley to the south. It dead ends at the south end of this site. This has existing water and sewer stubs that we plan to use for this development. Current zoning is residential mixed neighborhood. The proposed single-family attached is an allowable use for this zoning, and the allowable density is 6 to 18 units per acre. Jumping back to the site plan, again, we are proposing 28 single-family attached homes. The maximum allowable number of homes would be 58 units in the residential mixed neighborhood zoning. Each home is planned to have a 2-car garage for each unit. There are 13 additional guest parking spaces along the north side of the alley, which is the Street B right-of-way. We have 1.08 acres of common area open space between outlots B and C, so that's quite a bit of open space for the site area. Right now, we have planned walking trails and sidewalks all around the perimeter of the development. All of the planned units will face east and west. All of the units on the east side will front Sundance. The remainder of the units will front open space either in the center or on the west side. We also will have a large landscape setback from Highway 66. This is part of the Highway 66 corridor requirements. Again, there are existing water and sewer utility connections in Arrow Court and Sundance Drive. We also plan on making a water connection in Sundance to loop that connection. The southwest corner of the site, as previously mentioned, will provide future access for the golf course maintenance facility. So here's just a landscaped illustrative concept plan. You can see that we are trying to emulate what Providence is doing across the street as far as the open space concept. We'd like to have the perimeter walking trails and path with the central open space area. This is sort of the way Providence put their design together, and we like the aesthetics of that and the functionality, so we're trying to emulate it with what we have. You'll also notice that on the south end of the site, there's an existing 30-foot landscape buffer between the rear of the existing lots in Spring Valley and the right-of-way for Street A. When you incorporate Street A, there's an increased setback distance of 80 feet before you hit any lots. This is an enlargement for the current planned Central Park. Right now, the plan for the Central Park is really to incorporate some shaded seating areas between the tree, the shaded pergola, places to sit down, a small open grass playfield for kids to play in. We really want it to be green and vibrant, have a lot of pretty landscaping, places to hang out, sit, walk your dogs, just make it feel like an inclusive center space for the community. Again, Zach went through pretty much all of this, so I won't take too much time on this, but as far as the review criteria goes, we are consistent with the comprehensive plan, zoning codes and ordinances. The 28 homes at a density of 8.5 D per acre is consistent with the residential mixed neighborhood zoning. Up to 58 units would again be allowable at maximum density. Individual lot sizes and setbacks are consistent with the standards. We have a 50-foot landscape gateway buffer in the Highway 6 mixed-use corridor. And the proposed development is overall consistent with the comprehensive plan. As far as compliance with the applicable city standards, we do have a right-in, right-out access proposed to Sundance that required an exception. This was because we were just barely short of the distance requirement from the Collector Street entrance. We also have drainage and utilities. The connections and proposed and usage are in accordance with city standards. Again, the application is compatible with surrounding property in terms of land use, site, and building layout and design and access. The paired homes provide a transition in density and land use from the Highway 66 area into the surrounding single family. This is, we believe, is a natural progression from smaller lots into the bigger lots to the south and the even larger lots to the east. An existing neighborhood buffer along the southern property further enhances the compatibility between the neighborhoods. It provides a landscape buffer that's already in place. The proposed access road to Arrow Court and Sundance Drive will provide additional separation between the existing homes and new lots, and also direct the majority of the traffic flow coming out of the neighborhood directly onto Sundance, so they don't have to use Arrow Court and go through the existing neighborhood to the south. The homes are separated from all of the surrounding neighborhoods by landscaped area. We plan to have landscaping all around the perimeter of this site, landscaping to the south, the east, the west, and to the north. This application will not adversely affect surrounding properties. We've already talked about some of the environmental concerns. The proposed preliminary plat was designed to have no adverse effect to any of the surrounding properties. We believe it's compatible with the neighborhoods to the south and to the east. The paired homes, as preliminary platted, will provide a residential use that's at the low end of the permitted density in the RMN zone district. Noise generated from Highway 66 is mitigated by the enhanced landscape gateway buffer, and the proposed lots are more than 70 feet from the edge of the existing roadway. The application does comply with the sustainability evaluation system. We don't have any riparian or environmentally sensitive areas on the location. This application also includes an appropriate transportation plan. We have pedestrian circulation around the entire perimeter of the site, and the proposed access off of Sundance Drive and Arrow Court is actually the optimum configuration for the site. As far as the preliminary subdivision plat review criteria, the subdivision will not limit the ability to integrate surrounding land into the city. The surrounding land to the east, west, and south is already in the city and already developed. Everything to the north of Highway 66, we should have no impact on. Again, the subdivision will not create lots that are undevelopable or burdened with costs that would preclude development from occurring on the property. The subdivision has been designed to accommodate the proposed paired homes. This is an existing infill parcel, and as such, there is no opportunity to impede the development on surrounding properties that they've already been developed again. The proposed phasing plan for the development of the subdivision is rational in terms of available infrastructure capacity and adequate public facilities. This is such a small site with 28 units that there's actually no phasing currently being proposed, and there should be no stress on the existing infrastructure. And that's all I've got, so I'll turn it back over to you guys for questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, this is a public hearing item. For that, and Jane is getting the list, we do give the public a chance to comment on this. Each person will have 5 minutes to comment. Once again, step up to the microphone. Please state your name and address for the record. And Jane is bringing the list. Thank you, Jane. The first person is Paul Stalls.
Right, thank you, sir. Paul Stowles, 2011 Sundance Drive, Longmont. Thanks for your time this evening. Firstly, 2 points on what I just heard that I wasn't initially going to discuss, but I should share them anyway as they were prompted by what I saw. The noise to the development, the setback from 66, I understand there's been other discussions about at some point widening that and making it 2 lanes each way. So unless you're taking land from the north side, that would reduce the gap back to the properties, just to make sure that's in everyone's mind. And secondly, the enhanced traffic flow. I did read all the attachments. I don't fundamentally disagree with the traffic study and the fact that it's only 28 homes and the amount of extra traffic is minimal, but I would say it adds to an existing problem that turning left out of Sundance onto 66 is already practically impossible to the point that residents go another way because there's no light there and it's not safe. I'm talking about peak traffic hours. The 2 points I came to discuss, please. One is directly related to this development, and the other I'd say is perhaps a little tangential, but I'll throw it in anyway. My primary concern is this. I was very pleased to see all the correspondence from the golf course regarding the access rights and obligations that any developer would have to recognize and to take on in terms of the maintenance facility being so close. My concern is that is there any risk that approving this development is then used subsequently as an argument to relocate the golf course to the maintenance facility back to closer to the clubhouse, which would be an issue which myself, I don't speak on behalf of all the residents of Sundance, but I'm backing onto the golf course, and I was one of a number of people that participated in our objections about 12, 18 months ago into having that developed in the main area by the clubhouse as being an eyesore, bad design, contradiction of a whole bunch of issues. So I was very pleased when that was revisited, and plans, I believe, are currently underway to consider developing it in the existing location. So I'd just like to go on record of expressing that concern. I wouldn't want this to become a reverse argument later that having built this development, it is then used as an argument to move the maintenance facility back to the other location that was proposed. I think that would be a mistake and not good. So if you guys could comment on that risk, I would appreciate it. The second point, and perhaps slightly less direct, is Sundance neighborhood looks like a children's kindergarten art project at the moment. We've now had 3 sets of all the flags put in for water, electricity, gas, and some wooden stakes. The work there is planned, I believe, to extend the gas main with a wider pipe, because after Providence was built, there isn't sufficient gas pressure coming from 17 up to the north end, and in the winter when it gets below freezing, people's heating is crapping out because of safety features on low gas pressure. So there's a plan afoot, I understand it, to put a bigger pipe in. Clearly that wasn't worked through correctly when Providence was built. We wouldn't have this issue. So I'd like to make sure that's been considered under sufficient utilities, et cetera, that this development will be tapping into. And as a side issue, which is perhaps not directly relevant to this topic, but you can perhaps direct me or get me some feedback subsequently later, having mapped it out 3 times to do the work now, and with winter around the corner, there's been very little communication about what exactly is going to happen and how this is going to happen. Is it going to tear up our lawns, tear up our driveways? It seems to be going up the west side of Sundance from 17 right up to the top to put this pipe in. So if you can, if you don't know now, perhaps you can get me an answer on when's that work being done, how disruptive will it be, is there a good plan to make sure we don't have to put a wider pipe in later as we continue to add houses. It looks like we've got a minute left, so if I've not expressed myself clearly, I'm happy to take questions if I've been at all vague or confusing in my haste to get this in my time allowed.
So Paul, we cannot ask questions because of the rules. We cannot ask questions of you, so it's only basically a one-way conversation.
I will hope that you understood me clearly then. If not, you can obviously watch the video. So do you comment at all on my questions now, or do I get feedback later? How does it work?
We may incorporate your comments into questions we ask later.
During this open discussion or in private later?
No, open.
Okay, thank you very much.
The next person is Brett, I believe it's Lambert.
Yes, I'm Brett Lambert at 2401 Turhinian Drive, which is immediately south and just 1 or 2 down the corner from the proposed development. And I agree with most of the concerns that Mr. Stahl's raised, and so I won't go through those. My primary concern, I guess, is with the safety considerations. The one thing I disagree with, I guess, is that the traffic study as is this better? Okay. Again, I agree with all of Mr. Stahl's concerns about the expansion, future expansion in Highway 66. As I read the preliminary traffic study, and I believe it may have been updated since then, it seems like a nominal increase at that first turnaround on Sundance South and coming out of either Turhinian Drive or the new access point, the exception access point, right in, right out, onto Sundance. But in that traffic study, you know, there seem to be 2 time periods of an hour, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, that generate these numbers that don't seem remarkable, and yet we've lived there for 2.5 years and have seen a dramatic increase. You know, this was done, the traffic survey, I guess the count that they made to prepare their survey was made in August of 2021, kind of at the height of COVID, and we've seen a very dramatic, I think, increase in the traffic. It is almost impossible to get onto 66 from Sundance right now with the increased traffic at more than just the high times of the day. And so when I read in the executive summary that, based on their preliminary count from August of 2021, that their traffic increase is 19.8% and you're not required to have CDOT input until 20%, it raises real concerns for me about safety. Because shortly after we moved in, one of the first things I witnessed was a fatality. And Lori commutes that way to the clinic and has for years. She no longer commutes on that road. I mean, the traffic is becoming quite dangerous. That's our major concern, and I would think we would want some more input on the traffic. We are close enough to that, and I would suggest that the traffic study really needs to be updated to try to incorporate some more planning with respect to the impacts, not only northbound at 66, but also redirecting most of that traffic back south all the way through the residential neighborhood down to 17th. So, having said that, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the audience who would like to come up and comment on this? I believe we may have somebody, or they're leaving. Okay. With nobody else coming up to speak, I'll go ahead and close the public invited to be heard on this item. And I will open it up to the commission for questions, comments, motions. I'll start, Zach. The applicant mentioned that there was an exception for the right in, right out, but I didn't see that in the communication about an exception being required for this.
Yeah, that's a Public Works exception design request that's approved by the Public Works General Manager. We have Rachel, we have Chris with us who could come down and speak to that. Sounds good.
Any other questions? Commissioner Goldberg, just a second here. I'll turn my.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Hey, Zach. Why don't we just get right into it? I appreciate your kind of swift run through your presentation this evening, but I think there's a lot of folks who have expressed concerns about several items on this project, so I wonder if we could just talk through a few of those. Of those 16 correspondence you got before today's meeting, most of them had concerns around traffic. I wonder if we could just spend a few minutes kind of reviewing the traffic study, how we got to the numbers of anticipated increase in, flow through. A lot of folks are frustrated or concerned that how could 28 lots yield only 20 trips during peak hours. Can you just help us find some comfort in why this isn't going to be a bigger deal for this neighborhood than it seems?
Thank you, Commissioner Goldberg. I would be happy to call on my friends in the Public Works Department to field that question.
Great.
I believe we have Caroline Michael. She's our transportation engineer.
Hey, Caroline.
Hello, Commissioner Goldberg.
Hey, thanks for coming up. You're kind of the one in the hot seat today because
Okay.
a lot of concerns today are around traffic. And I wonder if you could just kind of review how you interpret the traffic study, what how do those traffic studies get to those numbers, and why aren't we requiring more traffic mitigation and management and raising more red flags around them?
Okay, so the applicants are generally required to go through a process of scoping a traffic study where we cover what we want to see addressed on that study. In this case, from a trip generation standpoint, it was came in the 300 range, like daily expected trips, which is actually under the threshold for what we would typically, on a technical level, require for a traffic impact study, which is 500 trips a day. Those numbers are calculated using the ITE Trip Generation Manual, which is a nationwide publication based on many years of research and how different land uses generate traffic. So they will have different categories. I believe they use single-family detached housing in this case, and there's also a related use, which is multifamily low-rise, which might be more of a townhome use. At the end of the day, the numbers are pretty similar, depending on which land use you end up using. There's also a comment about signalization at Highway 66 and Sundance. So it's been something that has been raised before as a concern, and the traffic study did look at this. So what they do is there's actually 4 hours of counts if there was confusion around that. So it's 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. are usually the time periods chosen due to those being peak rush hour times. And they evaluated those volumes to see if it would meet a signal warrant, which in this case it did not.
Okay, thank you. Can you talk about when we're not flagging any concerns or any increase in need for more mitigation or evaluating whether this is the right number of properties in this space or not? Does the traffic study also take into consideration the existing condition of the road? So for example, we've heard a few folks say, okay, so maybe the overall impact isn't very much, but boy, this road already stinks. So can we talk about how does this traffic study consider the existing conditions on that road?
So which road?
Sorry, Sundance. I think Sundance Drive
Okay.
primarily. It seems like the heart of it is really between Sundance and Highway 66 and Sundance.
Okay. So we have conducted data collection on Sundance Drive before. I believe it ended up being in the neighborhood of 1,500 vehicles per day on that road, which is pretty typical for a city collector. And there's also quite a bit of existing infrastructure on that road, including the median just south of 66 and a few roundabouts.
Okay. The study was performed someone commented during COVID or during the peak of COVID. How has the industry responded to testing and studies when many folks were staying home or things like that?
So it is possible to apply some kind of like growth rate or mitigating factor to that, and it's something we could potentially ask the applicant to do. Or the other alternative is just complete new data collection.
Mm-hmm. And can we require that? Can we require or request the applicant to do a new traffic study before the development continues?
Potentially. It would have to be something we'd have to be pretty clear, I think, in our reasoning why we are requesting that
Sure.
additional analysis.
Okay. Caroline, thanks for that. I think in the end, in my service here on P&Z, I've learned that the traffic studies never yield the results that the neighbors who are impacted expect it to. You expect it to say that there's going to be thousands of new trips and that it's going to crush the neighborhood, but the studies never show those numbers. It's always 20 or 30 or 100 or something that really does not justify the increased measures. So I appreciate your feedback, and maybe I'll pivot it back to Zach for a few minutes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Zach. There were some questions around this utility improvements going on, the gas line running up and down, and its impact on neighbors, and whether it's the right gauge and thickness to be able to accommodate the increased growth in the neighborhood. Who on your team can tell us more about that? Hopefully it's not Carolyn, who just sat down.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldberg. It's not Caroline. I'd love to call on my other friend in the Public Works Department, Rachel, or if Chris is here. I think Rachel's here. Oh, no, Chris is here. Hey, Chris. Chris is going to come talk to you now.
Chairman and Commissioner Goldberg, Chris Hoffer, Public Works and Natural Resources. What they're talking about is an expansion of an Excel gas line, which is outside of the city purview. We don't have gas service within the city. So we work with Excel, and they will be required to come in and pull a work in the right-of-way permit at a minimum. And that work in the right-of-way permit will have all of the information that's associated with where the gas line should go, working hours, the extent of the project, and expected dates, finish dates. So if anybody would like to, they can certainly call the Public Works Department at 303-651-8416, which is our general number, and talk to Lynn Marquez in our work in the right-of-way permit department.
Great, thanks, Chris. Chris, is it safe to say that Excel was contacted about this potential development and is able to manage the increased burden from the new developments? I know some folks were saying that it was struggling in years past, or there was signs of it not being appropriate.
Sure, I cannot speak to how Excel is designing their system, but they are contacted when new projects come in. They are our reference, they're a referenced entity on all of our applications.
Yes.
And we do work with them closely. I do trust that they are designing it so that it will accommodate future development as well. So,
Sure. Zach, did Excel confirm that they're able to accommodate this development?
Yes, Commissioner Goldberg, they did, and that letter is included in the communications attachment of your report.
Thank you. Zach, I'm not sure if this question's for you or for the applicant, but there was some concern raised around buffers, and specifically along the southern aspect of the development. Excuse me. There was requests for a 6-foot fence put in, trees or other buffers. Can you just kind of clarify for us on the record what is being proposed? And maybe this is for the applicant. What is the proposed buffer, and how does that fit into our review? Is it adequate? What more can we ask?
Sure, Commissioner Goldberg. So I will say that there is a required landscape buffer directly to the south. It is specifically a matter of every 30 feet and every 750 square feet, 1 tree and 5 shrubs. That's the whole requirement. I'm happy to let the applicant speak to how they believe that requirement has been exceeded. I can tell you that the requirement has been met.
Okay, thanks. I think I'd like to do that if you don't mind.
Okay.
Joey, can I ask you to come on up and tell us a little bit more about that southern aspect of your property?
Yeah, absolutely. The comments when they were made were from the original preliminary plat design, which was actually a different design. At that time, we were planning a giant loop around the site. Basically, all of the lots sort of backed to the south end of the site with an alley that was there. The existing 30-foot landscape buffer from Spring Valley actually exceeds those current landscape buffer requirements. And with the additional road right-of-way there now, there's actually an additional 50 feet worth of space. It's not landscaped space on the south side, obviously, because it's road, but there will be some enhanced landscaping on the side yards of those lots, so there'll be additional landscaping on the other side of the road as well. So
Okay.
that setback distance has been increased since those comments were made.
Okay, thank you. Zach, I got one more topic before I let the rest of the commissioners chime in. Besides traffic, the other recurring theme in our communications from the public is around density. I think technically the applicant could have built a denser project. I think they're tracking at about 8 dwelling units per acre, but could have done a much denser project. But the neighbors, again, don't feel like that would fit in, or like, are currently struggling with wrapping their head around 28 lots, never mind, what it could have been. Can you tell us a little bit about how do we calculate how many lots can fit into that space? What's impacting that? And maybe just provide some clarity there, and then why their 8 dwelling units per acre makes sense.
Certainly. So it's calculated by a ratio. In the residential mixed neighborhood zone district, you have a range of allowed density. So at the bottom of that range is 6 dwelling units per acre. The top of that range is 18 dwelling units per acre. So when I go to do the math, I'm looking at 3.27 acres at between a range of 6 and 18 dwelling units per acre. So to calculate the maximum allowed density, I do 18 dwelling units to 1 acre times 3.27 gets you about 58 dwelling units. And that's the most that they would be allowed to build on this site. So for me, when I'm doing the review, I check to make sure that number is within that allowed range. This time it is.
Is there anything else that goes into when you and staff are recommending or confirming that this meets the review criteria? Do you take anything else into consideration, or is it just the math? Do you kind of look at the surrounding properties and say, well, this one's sitting at 7 dwelling units per acre, and this one's at 10, so this fits in? Or are there any other factors, or is it strictly a math question?
To determine whether the code is met, it's strictly a math question. Now, of course, we do look at other items in our review, residential compatibility being one. In this situation, we're looking at paired homes in the mixed-use neighborhood adjacent to residential single-family in that zone district. That, to me, is a natural transition that I believe is compatible. That's just another example of one of the things we'd look at. But as far as that particular code requirement, it's just a math question.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Let me yield the mic for a bit.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I just have a few comments relative to concerns that the neighbors have had, maybe not specifically in public hearing tonight, but in the correspondence that we all got in our packet. And a couple comments with respect to the traffic study. Personally, I think it was a bad traffic study. It was done during COVID. It was done on one day. It was done during the summer when school was not in session, which generates a lot of trips. And in going through the details of it, I found some inconsistencies with some of the tables to the point where I don't believe it and I don't find it valid. Also, the fact that they said there was going to be a 19.8% increase when 20% would require some input from CDOT, I think is just splitting hairs, and that they were looking for a number that would just pass. I don't think it was genuinely presented. Be that as it may, the intersection of 66 and Sundance is a bad intersection. You can't turn left there. And the people that live in that neighborhood don't go that way because you can't safely turn left there. All of the traffic is either directed to the east, or you have to drive down Sundance down to 17th Street to get out of the neighborhood. So the bigger issue is the traffic flow in the whole area, not specifically with respect to these few units that are going to be built. So if I throw out the traffic study as not very good information, the other concerns, one was compatibility, and this graphic that was left up on the screen, I think really does show a good compatibility with the neighbors to the south. If you look at the footprint of the duplex relative to the size and footprint of the houses to the south, you see that they're pretty similar. And these duplex buildings, at least in their concept plan, they're really cute. They're nice architecturally, and they're going to look pretty much like a single-family home, and they're going to fit in very nicely with the area. Let's see. I had another one. Oh, and just wanted to point out that many of the concerns that we received in writing from the neighborhood had to do with the prior configuration where the alleys were going the other way. And now the configuration of the alley that loops around does not have any of the houses backing up to the south subdivision. So that's been improved. The developer listened to the input and changed the plan, and I think that's good. So in general, I really like this project, and I hope it goes through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question regarding the alleyway, and I'm not sure to whom I should address this. Is it a private alley or is it a public alley? How will it be maintained?
Thank you, Commissioner Flake. It's a private alley, and the portion of the street below it to the south is public.
And I assume utilities are within that alley area?
Yes.
And if they're public utilities, by whom would those utilities be maintained since it's a private street?
The city.
The city will have permission to go into the private alley to maintain the public services.
That's correct.
And what services, aside from, I assume, sewer and water, will be in that alley? Sewer,
Correct.
water, anything else?
Just sewer and water.
Sewer and water.
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
And so now, since the HOA is responsible for the surface and the city is responsible for what's underneath, how does that work in terms of funding the street maintenance problems that may come up if the city decides they need to dig something up? How will that work out? Is there an HOA in place that will pay for that?
I think the current plan is for there to be an HOA in place for this community. That's the way we typically do developments. But it was also my understanding with this alleyway that we are currently meeting all of the requirements to make this a public alleyway. If I'm mistaken in that, somebody behind me can correct me, but I think it was our intent to make this a public alleyway.
And Public Works is on board with that?
Yes, Commissioner Flake, the way they've laid it out, it does meet the requirements for a public alley if they so choose to do that.
Okay, so then you'd have responsibility for the whole 9 yards there, and we're not looking for the poor HOA to
Correct.
maintain the street area.
Yep.
Thank you.
Interesting. Actually, Commissioner Boone, you made a statement that there were parts of the traffic study that you did not trust. For the do you have those notes, what you found that you do not agree with? And can we have somebody from traffic come down to speak to these points?
Ready?
Okay, well, aside from the fact that 19.8% really is 20%, the page I'm looking at in the traffic study is page 20 of the traffic study. And there's a table relative to delays during the peak hours. We have the existing scenario in 2021. We have a 2024 background. We have a 2024 background plus the project. We have a 2045 background and a 2045 background plus the project. And if you look at the first three categories, it pretty much makes sense that there's a little more weight and a little more traffic with the project than there is to the background. And there's a little more weight for projected 2024 than there is for 2021. And then you get down to 2045, and all of a sudden those numbers jump up to double what they were in 2024 in the background area, and then they're half in the background plus project area. So to me, that data looks incorrect. Do you see where I'm speaking?
Yeah, you're looking at that northbound. Yeah, I see what you're talking about.
And when I see something like that in a traffic study, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I am an engineer. So I'm used to looking at numbers and at data. And if I see something like that presented, I'm going to question the whole thing.
I can actually speak to that a little bit. The numbers you're looking at the bottom, 2045 background plus project, if you look at the bottom, the last column includes 2 eastbound and westbound through lanes. This takes into consideration the scheduled improvements to Highway 66 going from a 2 to a 4 lane. That's why you're seeing a reduction in those numbers.
I guess a question for you as well. I was trying to look up, were they assuming like long-term signalization? Okay, because I'm like, that's the other reason it might be lower, but regardless.
So it's, I didn't follow that. So when you go from the 2045 background to the 2045 background plus the project, the numbers are less than half.
That's because they're accounting for the number of lanes on Highway 66 doubling from 2 to 4. It's the background plus project, and you see the hashtag at the bottom, and look at the note at the very bottom of the table. This is accounting for the anticipated expansion of Highway 66 that's supposed to occur in the next 10 years, around 2035.
Okay, but both of those lower categories would have that. So we'd have double lanes for both of those.
No, they
categories.
wouldn't. Only the one with the hashtag at the end of it accounts for the 4 lanes. The 2045 without it does not.
I believe what Commissioner Boone is saying is that
You can't compare those two.
the Highway 66 improvements are not dependent on this project.
Correct.
So they will do that regardless. It's not something that would only apply afterwards, which if it is an inconsistency, it's something I can ask the traffic engineer to correct. I don't remember who did this one, Curtis Rao. And that's a comment we can make. And I guess I also wanted to, clarify further on signal warrants, because there are multiple different signal warrants. Not all of them are applicable to every application. In this case, so a lot of concern has been raised about safety and not being able to turn left. So crash incidents is a criteria and potential signalization. And from the data I have, it does not meet that criteria in terms of crash incidents. The intersection of Sundance and 66, that is.
It's because nobody uses the intersection because it's too hard to get across. But, okay, I think that's answered part of my question. I still don't have a lot of faith in this traffic study. It was done over so few hours during COVID, during the summer.
Also, I was just researching it back there. to see, well, one, there's no requirement that applicants have to perform traffic counts during the school year. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they actually were. So it's, yeah, Tuesday, August 24th, 21. So that, I believe that is at the beginning of the school year, so.
Maybe.
So.
Okay. So I guess what I concluded is that, you know, there's traffic issues in this area. This project minimally affects the traffic issues that are already in this area. So that's just my opinion and my comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Don't go anyplace.
Told
Thank
were
you.
gonna be busy.
In regards to the traffic study and the numbers and the future possibilities of that intersection, who hypothetically would be required to install that signal? Who would have to pay for it should it become warranted?
The city, probably.
Well,
We're not the only decision-making body on that, so we do have to present that a signal warrant has been satisfied
and
to
that,
CDOT, so.
okay, and so CDOT may have the final word on whether or not that intersection gets signalized.
Yes, they would have input.
And what hypothetically what could happen to the intersection if, say, in 10 years or 20, and CDOT has other projects that take more priority, and they never widen 66 because it actually doesn't go very far. It comes off of I-25 from the east, and then it goes to just past what, Lyons? And Boulder County is probably never going to invest in their part of it, hypothetically. So what would conceivably happen in that situation if the road never gets widened? How do we get to a warranted situation? Because obviously it's a matter of safety, even now, at that intersection.
So a few things we do have, so there is, it was mentioned before, there's a Highway 66 Planning and Environmental Linkages study that CDOT completed a few years ago.
Right?
We do have, so the city has an active CIP and design for Highway 66, but it covers the piece from Hover to Maine, so it's the west side. I don't know where that is in the design process right now. But as far as east of Main Street, Highway 287, I have not seen
Highway
any design plans.
66?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I guess further from that, it's typically something that we would do. We would continue to monitor the intersection. We've done it with other intersections on state highways as well. So we're like 66 and Alpine, we get a lot of similar comments. And we've completed recent counts there, and it's just a matter of, quite frankly, just keeping track of it over time. And also the crash data.
Right, okay, all of that gets looked at. So what would need to happen to motivate any kind of a study or consideration by the city? I mean, this has got to be part of the capital improvement project budgets, so it'd have to be budgeted. What would it take for the city of Longmont to decide to pursue that? Because you need more than one light between Pace and the County Line Road. There has to be another one. It's the distance. Does that require perhaps a slowing down of the speed in that area? Do the speed limits come down? Because that would also contribute to greater safety on the road.
So we can request lowering speed limits to CDOT. Ultimately, that's their call.
What would it take for the city to do that?
I can do that.
Could
I
you-
can't make any guarantees.
No, I understand, but if we don't start asking questions
Yes.
of people that have money and have decision-making possibilities, we don't get to where we need to go. And that would be my concern. I know I can't ask you to do a job. Your supervisors decide what you will do. But in my mind, that seems like an appropriate step to take. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Well, Eugene was just saying, we do have a specific criteria for approval, and this is adjacent to Highway 66, but it's not the total criteria for approval. So it is an overall issue for the community.
Thanks, Chairman. Carolyn, may I hit you with just one or two more questions, and then we'll get you off the hook here. I appreciate Commissioner Boone bringing up questions around the legitimacy of the traffic study, because I think it's really important that we're here making decisions, and we can only, make those decisions based off of the information we have. And I think the discussion showed some clarity and helped us better understand the chart and bring some comfort. But in the end, it's kind of your job, I think, to approve the traffic study and, put your stamp of approval on it, you and your team and staff. Would you just clarify for us, how did you review the study, and what in turn gave you and city staff the confidence to say, cool, this is an adequate traffic study, here, commission, make decisions off of that?
So, let's see. I believe so before going into this, I was already aware of many of the previous issues that have been raised, particularly about Highway 66 and Sundance. So that's the first thing I looked at to see if they met a traffic signal warrant, and they did not.
Yes.
So, are you asking, I don't know how to answer the question, how we review it?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Commissioner Boone pointed out some discrepancies in the numbers, or at least to her understanding. Could you just review for us how, before it gets to us and eventually to City Council, how do your team look at it and, kind of say, cool, this is good, or no, this doesn't meet the grade, you need to provide a new one?
Okay, so we typically look at, so I know there was some confusion over some of the specific numbers.
Sure.
So there's, a few things we look at. We look at the level of service benchmark criteria. In this case, our benchmark criteria actually only apply to signalized intersections. So there's not a lot. So when I'm looking at something like that, even if it's a failing grade, there's not always a ton of, recourse to take if something is. And it's, like you said, a lot of times that collector approaches to highways do perform at a lower level of service, and that's how it is. Ultimately, we would look at our standards and see, is this meeting what's in the standards? Now, at the same time, I'm not perfect, and perhaps I did miss something. I will be looking at this, after today's meeting. And it's still a comment. We're in preliminary, so we can potentially also ask the applicant to clarify items. So.
Thank you. On that chart, and we've heard in our discussion, they reference the improvements to Highway 66, widening it from 2 to 4 lanes. Can you just remind me, is that confirmed? Is that happening? Is that maybe happening? I've heard references to it happening within the next 10 years. What's the reality on that improvement? And is that in our control, or is that a CDOT project?
It would be CDOT, and I can't speak to their schedule.
Okay.
They have completed, I can tell you they've completed that planning and environmental linkages study. They've also completed an access control plan along Highway 66.
Okay.
But I can't speak to any timing on widening projects at this moment, so.
Okay. Glenn or Zach, is there anyone else who would have more visibility into, projections from CDOT for an improvement like that?
Thank you, Commissioner Goldberg. For that question, if it were posed to me, Caroline is the first person that I would ask.
Okay. All right, Caroline, I appreciate your feedback here. I think in the end, you know, the commission needs to make the decision based on the data that's given to us, that's been reviewed by staff, and, you know, kind of in the end make our recommendations off of that. Or require or request a, you know, an additional traffic study. What I've heard from you is that you and your team have reviewed the study. There's a big kind of open-ended situation here, whether 66 will or will not be improved. It seems like the applicant's study takes both into consideration. So I'll pivot away from traffic questions for a second. Thanks. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Goldberg.
Hey, Zach, excuse me, one of the applicants had questions about the future plans for the golf course maintenance facility. Do we have any purview into that, and can that weigh into our decision at all today?
Thank you, Commissioner Goldberg. So the golf course maintenance facility is currently under development review by staff. It's in its own site plan review process at the time. One thing that I will mention is that they were able to provide their own referral agency comments as part of this development. All of that is in your correspondence packet. As far as whether or not, I'm not sure what you're getting at as far as like whether that development will affect this one and your ability to make a decision. I don't know if you can clarify that piece for me.
Sure, yeah, I think one of the members of the public was concerned that our approval of this project could then impact where and where that golf course facility, maintenance facility goes. I think my takeaway is that really can't measure into our discussion today or how we vote today. You know, I just think that's really not a matter that we can manage.
I would agree that it doesn't fall under the review criteria that we use to make our analysis, a recommendation, and your approval. The one thing that I would just say to kind of close the loop on your question is that there was a previous application for that facility to go somewhere else. They had a neighborhood meeting, there was quite a bit of feedback, and the maintenance facility then returned to making improvements on the site that they're currently on. Glenn, if you have any other context on that, feel free to pipe up, but that to me is where that project is at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
And I don't think there's any impact on this one.
Yeah, the plan is to locate at this site, and they have gone through review. I think it's slowed because of a lot of city projects with inflation, the price kind of skyrocketed. But my understanding is they intend to, as soon as they possibly can, build the rec facility at this location.
Okay, thanks, Glenn.
Zach, quick question. In looking at the subdivision to the south, do we have like an approximate density for that development? Oh.
There may be an actual density located in your packet with the attachment that I included from that original Spring Valley concept plan. I'll tell you that since it's residential single family, it is going to be pretty much one dwelling, it's one dwelling unit per lot, and the actual density will be less than 4 per acre.
I'm just going to quickly give my thoughts on this. As far as it seems to meet all of the review criteria. Really, the major issue seems to be the traffic. When we look at the traffic study, and we look at 2021 through 2024, including the project plus, it looks like there's minimal decreases to level of service. There's just a couple categories where they decrease. I do agree. I think I understand what happened in the 2045 area. It'd be kind of nice if there was a 2045 background hashtag so you could do a comparison, but I understand that's not in there, showing that without anything, it's going to be really bad, but because there's going to be work done, it's going to be actually better than what it is now. So In looking at that, I do have confidence that this isn't going to drastically decrease the traffic, and actually it's not going to put it into, at least as of 2024, any failing grades. It does seem to fit with the other area, the other developments in the area. Does look like it has the proper landscaping, and the architecture does seem to be compatible with the subdivision to the south. So as of right now, I would be in favor of this, but look forward to hearing from the other commissioners. And Commissioner,
Thanks, Chairman. Okay, yeah, I largely agree with your sentiments, Chairman. I too feel like this development or project before us meets the review criteria, both the standard review criteria and those for the preliminary subdivision plat request. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Thank you. So checking those two boxes. Traffic is hard. Traffic is really something that impacts, residents every day, and the traffic studies never show the numbers that we expect them to show us. But at the end of the day, we have to, approve or not approve a project based off of the kind of industry norms, city standards, and using that information that we get, then determine whether it's going to overly impact a neighborhood. And for better, in this situation, those studies show that this won't be an increased burden or an excessive burden on the neighborhood. And so with that, I'm able to move past the concerns with the traffic, knowing that it won't be me, it'll be, my neighbors, over on those streets that are impacted. But we just have to use the metrics provided to us. Additionally, there's, it's no question that there's a need for housing and diverse housing in our town. And I think bringing in these paired homes is a great way to increase housing opportunities in a city that's struggling to provide enough housing for our workforce and everyone else in between who want to work, live, and play here. Finally, just reaching out to the residents, I find comfort knowing that this could have been a much more dense project, that the applicant technically could have made a more dense, with more lots, and really make this less compatible to the neighborhood. And they seem to have found a balance there. So recognizing that it could have been more dense, sure, it's not single family housing, but it could have been, but that's not really what the market's calling for right now. I think this makes a lot of sense. So with that, and recognizing that they exceeded the buffer requirements, I feel comfortable making a motion to approve this PZR. So with that, let me put it in real quick. With that, I'll move to I recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission approve the villas at Spring Valley preliminary subdivision plat application as reflected in PZR 2022-10A.
Commission, Eugene May, City Attorney. So in PZR-A and actually throughout the PZRs, in Section 3, it says that the PZ recommends approval for a preliminary subdivision. PZ is the decision-making body, so I would suggest that we amend the PZR to take out the recommend and grammatically Commission approves the villas at Spring Valley preliminary subdivision plat. You should amend the PZR to correct that. I make a motion to amend and then approve, if successful, approve the amended motion.
Yeah, forgive me. I'd like to amend my motion, thank you, suggesting that the Planning and Zoning approve the villas at Spring Valley preliminary subdivision plat application as reflected in PZR 2022-10A.
with Section 3 removing the word recommends.
Is that safe or,
Correct. I'd remove the word recommend.
and removing the word recommend from section 3 in the,
And I
there you
think,
go.
yeah, I think the intent is clear.
I second the motion with the exclusion of the word recommends in section 3.
Thank you. We have a motion. Self back on. So we have a motion. It has been seconded. Is there any more debate, any more comments? If not, Jane, let's go ahead and take a vote.
Vice Chairman Goldberg. Chairman Poland. Commissioner Flagg. Commissioner Boone. Chairman, that passes unanimously 4-0.
Thank you. With the passing of this, this item now enters the appeal process. This item now enters a 7-day appeal period. During this time, any aggrieved party may appeal the commission's decision by submitting a written appeal letter stating why the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision should be amended or reversed by City Council. All appeals must be in writing and must be received in the city clerk's office and the planning office within the 7-day appeal period. The appeal period begins Thursday, October 20th at 8 a.m. It ends Wednesday, October 26th at 5 p.m. That is our last public hearing item. We do have other business, and everybody's invited to stay along with it. We have, let me bring up the communication on this. We have Brian Schumacher presenting for mixed use and non-residential design standards amendments.
While Brian's setting up, I'll just say, this is, generally, there's a group of ordinances that we've been bringing to council. This is something you haven't seen before, so we thought we'd give you an update and certainly take your input on it, on the design guidelines for particularly industrial buildings.
Well, that's to your benefit then, if I only have 5 minutes. Oh, man, I can't wear those. Well, thank you, Commissioners. I'm Brian Schumacher with City Planning Staff. It's been a little while since I've talked to you all, but good to be back. So we're here this evening to talk about some potential amendments to the Land Development Code related to, appropriate design standards for industrial buildings. And this agenda item particularly pertains to those types of industrial buildings that might include things like light and medium industrial buildings. I'm going to give a few examples as I go through the presentation slides. Warehouse, distribution buildings, public service, maintenance buildings, and other similar flex type of industrial buildings or storage buildings. And so these buildings, we're seeing a significant increase in demand for these types of buildings in our community, and they help bolster and the Longmont's economic vitality for our community. So the current design standards that we have in place that were originally created with a code update that, actually, I hate to admit this, but I was involved with back in 2001.
And they were amended over time, and most recently, with the 2018 code update, they were amended again. But the current design standards are focused more on mixed use and retail, office, and commercial buildings design, and less so on industrial building designs. And so the goal is to create standards for industrial buildings that allow more flexibility, given the building's form and function, while still providing quality design that meets community goals and design standards, purpose, and intent statement. So if I can figure out how to move the slide around. So this slide just shows, and I'm not going to read through all of this, but this shows in the kind of the beginning of the mixed use and non-residential design standards section, some of those purpose statements. And these purpose statements are consistent with the goals and policies that are enumerated in the Envision Longmont Comprehensive Plan. Obviously, it includes things such as enhancing character, visual interest, protecting property values, balancing communities' economic and aesthetic goals, things of that nature. So this next slide, these are just some of the current graphics that we have in the code, and these help to address key standards when reviewing mixed use and non-residential design standards. They address things such as site layout, building entrances, building articulation, both horizontal and vertical articulation, roof and parapet design, transparency, building materials, and colors. And the goal, obviously, is to have buildings that are engaging to the pedestrians, as well as provide architectural interest and variation. So, you've probably seen these buildings around town. These are just a couple of examples of vertical mixed-use developments that have incorporated most of the standards that were updated in 2018. A couple of these projects were constructed, or at least started construction before 2018, but obviously, for the most part, they incorporate those types of design standards, creating more pedestrian-friendly urban-style design. And this is just an example of some of the more recently constructed commercial development in our community that also have incorporated most of the standards that are part of the mixed use and non-residential design standards. You've got the Harvest Junction Commercial Center, Village at the Peaks. So then we move into industrial building design standards. So industrial buildings, on the other hand, tend to require different design features in an environment that is less pedestrian focused. Typically, industrial buildings are larger with different functions than mixed use or commercial buildings. Buildings on their front do include offices and customer entrances, but window and door openings are typically more limited because of storage and manufacturing operations that occur in large portions of the buildings. These buildings are typically located in industrial park settings that are serviced by trucks with limited amounts of pedestrian access. This and the next image are renderings of an industrial building project that was recently constructed in Southwest Longmont. So this rendering shows the backside of the same building. And obviously the backs and sides of industrial buildings not facing the street or other public areas or residential areas or mixed-use developments often provide less architectural variation due to the more intensive use of the area for manufacturing, loading, storage, and other uses. And this slide, this just shows, since I took the time to go out and actually look at this building that was constructed, this just shows kind of the finished product, and it's very similar to the renderings that were provided as we went through the review process. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the proposed amendments that you have in your packet. So staff has received some input from industrial building developers. And as we've gone through the review process for reviewing industrial buildings and looking at our current standards, we've come to the conclusion that there's frequently requests for modifications or variances to particular types of standards or design standards for these industrial buildings. And so, we've come to the conclusion that it would be appropriate to consider amending the code to create some more flexibility for industrial buildings. So the intent of the amendments are to acknowledge that industrial buildings have a different form and function, and that typically dictate more flexibility in terms of building design. So staff discussed the preliminary draft amendments with City Council this past August, and Council proceeded to direct staff to proceed with the amendments. And that's why we're here this evening, to talk with the Commission to get your input. See if you generally concur, or if you have any suggestions. We're certainly open to any input that the Commission may have before we finish drafting the ordinance for Council's consideration. So a lot of information on this slide. Certainly not going to go into it in detail, but if you have specific questions, I'm certainly happy to talk with the Commission about that. So it reflects most of the changes that are proposed with this new subsection C11 for industrial building design. There are also, just wanted to point out, there are also locational criteria when industrial buildings are adjacent to, for example, a residential zoning district or an existing or planned mixed-use development. And in those instances, we want a higher quality standard that might not apply to an industrial building in an industrial park that's surrounded by other industrial buildings. So in that instance, the buildings, when they're nearby residential or they're nearby mixed-use development, they need to meet most of the mixed-use and non-residential standards. So just to highlight a few of these changes that are enumerated on this slide. So in terms of horizontal articulation, the current code requires variation in wall planes, materials, textures, window design on all elevations. It's four-sided architecture. The proposed change would allow more flexibility in terms of only requiring wall plane variation on facades that include customer entrances and offices that are front on a public street or other public area, or perhaps face towards a residential area. All other variation standards would still apply, such as changing materials, textures, window design, things of that nature. In terms of building transparency, the current standard is that there's a 50% transparency standard for building facades that face towards a public street, a public area, residential area, for example. For the industrial standards, this standard would be reduced. You notice that in the pictures that I showed. Obviously, just because of the function of the industrial buildings, not all facades are able to provide as much transparency as that we would require for other building types, such as mixed-use developments or commercial retail developments. And so there's a lesser standard there, although it's still required for particularly frontages that include customer entrances and office space, frontages along public streets, other higher visibility areas. But, the back sides of the building obviously would not require nearly as much transparency. And then there's also allowances for different types of glass material, whereas in a mixed use or commercial development, we want clear glass to have visibility into the buildings, the activity spaces within the buildings, whereas in an industrial building, we could allow tinted glass or spandrel glass on areas that aren't where you might not have an office or a customer entrance area. A few other things of note, building materials. So the current code standard is the primary materials are brick, stone, glass, and stucco. Just because of the way industrial buildings are constructed, what's been added into the draft is precast or tilt-up concrete of quality composite or insulated metal panels with compatible finishes and colors that are also allowed as primary materials. And there's been a couple of good examples where they actually, when you do a tilt-up concrete building with a good quality finish, it almost looks like stucco material, or even an insulated metal panel that can look like a stucco material. And then I think a good example of kind of a composite metal panel, which you may have noticed before, is the UC Health Hospital as you're coming into town on the east side, along a large expanse of the primary hospital building at the entrance. They're utilized almost like a wood grain finish on their aluminum composite panels, which is a high quality material. And then in terms of roof lines, obviously the current code requires projections or recesses, dormers, changes in roof and parapet height, distinctive detailed architectural features or cornices to break up, continuous roof lines. And the proposed amendment would allow more flexibility on that, but it'd still be required on those higher visibility areas where you might have customer entrances or offices fronting along a street. So I didn't want to bore you with too much details, just wanted to give you a few examples of some of the proposed changes. Happy to discuss in more detail. Oh yeah, sure. I'm flexible, whatever you prefer to do. Sure.
Thank you. Brian, looking back under General Design Standards C, 1, site layout, and I wouldn't make this comment except that I noticed that all the way through the document you're updating and changing and modifying. So I thought I would discuss this part. Under B, compatibility with adjacent development. And I noted that under Roman numeral 4, areas and access for refuse and recycling collection. And I thought as long as you've gone that far, and for loading docks, particularly adjacent to residential development. Because sometimes we aren't clear enough and we end up with funny situations where you have a loading dock and then they figure, oh, 150 feet is enough, and then there's a residential development area. And it's never enough because loading docks don't operate under normal hours ever. And you
Right.
got the lighting and the noise and everything. So ideally, I would say they must be in a 90-degree change with a buffer wall.
Some type of screen wall,
Yeah,
additional
of the same
landscaping,
material
whatever that
of
might
the
be.
building. Usually, if it's out that way and then it's facing, away in a different side,
Sure,
then the residential area is far more protected. They're not going to be totally protected.
right.
Those things are noisy and bright, and
Yep, they certainly can
thought-
be.
give it a shot.
No, I
Thank you.
appreciate that feedback.
Thanks. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate your attention to the weeds here. Can you kind of keep me straight here? What we're doing here is proposing a new section titled Industrial Building Design Standards, because currently industrial buildings are being held up against the same bar, if you will, as what's listed as current here, which is mixed use.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Got it. The reason why, admittedly, I think it was just in our last meeting or 2 months ago, we had a light industrial building come before us. I think it was going to be behind Home Depot, and I was like, "That's a good looking industrial building," and I applauded it. And I think I even called it out during the meeting that I applaud industrial development, but that looks good. That looks like, the projects, Roosevelt Apartments and First and Main. So what I see here in the proposed versus the current is a little bit more a laxed approach to it. Okay, not 50%, 25%, okay, we're requiring premium materials here. We're loosening up, what that means in an industrial setting, which I think is fair, especially given what they're doing in an industrial setting. But I feel like industry has evolved a bit. When I used to think of industry, I thought, I don't know, what was there before First and Main Street. You know, I picture,
Sure.
Metal and hot metal and hammering things and building stuff. And now industry seems to take place a lot in, smaller, more curated places. So I guess I'm wondering, A, is this a trend that we're seeing across other municipalities? Loosening the requirements for an industrial development? Or are we saying, well, or is this more like correcting something that we've been off on? We've been too strict for these industrial needs, so let us correct a little bit and make it more feasible.
Commissioner Goldberg, I think it's more the latter, where our standards were pretty high and are pretty high. Trying to fit an industrial building into granted, I think we all want quality development in our community.
Sure.
And I think the fact that we have locational criteria built into this, where if it's adjacent to a residential area or it's near a existing or planned mixed-use development, that it has to meet a higher standard. But if it's in an area where that's an industrial park and there's other industrial buildings around it, then I think it's reasonable to consider a reduced standard for these types of industrial buildings. And I think that other communities have, that I've seen anyway, have specific standards for industrial buildings.
That we haven't had.
That we haven't had. So.
Cool. And are we losing business because of these standards? Do we know? I don't know if we need Jess Erickson up here or someone.
I don't know if we do. I mean, I know we've kind of gone back and forth with potential developers about the standards, and it has created some issues in terms of timing on approvals and the length of time that it takes to get, for example, a modification or a variance request. And so that might have a deterrent on somebody willing to look or relocate into Longmont.
Okay, thanks.
Actually, Brian nailed it. That's what I said. We do have tools in our code that we can make some adjustments up to a certain degree, but it adds time to the process and it adds some uncertainty as well. So that's what we've heard over and over is I need to get my project through, and we're trying to use a standard for a high pedestrian area and adapt them to an industrial building.
Thank you. First of all, Brian, this is great. I think you've done a great job with it, and I think it's a piece of the code that's been lacking. So good job. And I just have a couple of questions. And I'll ask them both, and then you can answer them together.
Sure.
First of all, what is the anticipated timeline for getting this enacted? And I'm assuming that in this interim period, that you're kind of in between the existing and what's proposed as new, because we, as a commission, have not seen projects coming through that need our review because they don't meet the current standards. So you must be doing those in-house, and that's got to be laborious. So this would certainly help that and make it a level playing field, and also encourage these types of developments to happen, which is certainly one of the trends. So I applaud it.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Boone. To respond to your questions, one, I think our ultimate goal would be to complete this by year end, if at all possible. I'm not sure if that'll be achieved, but we're going to certainly try to do that. If not, first quarter next year. And then the second question is that there may have been a few items in the past, I'm not sure in the recently there's been any applications that have come before the commission, but I think there's been some applications within the past. So when the code update was done in 2018, there may have been a few applications that came before the commission for variance requests in terms of design standards relative to industrial buildings. But you're right, for the most part, staff has looked at this and tried to negotiate, work with the applicants to come up with a design that could fit within what staff has the ability to, under the current code, to approve as a modification.
Yeah. Couple questions, and I'm going to state them both, and then I'll turn the mic back over to you. The first one is with the roof line. The prior intention was to break up roof lines, basically. Now it seems a little more relaxed, so can you speak as to what you're looking at for that? And the second one is more of a general question, kind of piggyback off of some earlier discussion. Who did you get input from this? Did you go out to the public? Did you go talk to the economic board? Who did you kind of bounce things off of to try to get some of these proposals in from?
Thank you. So in terms of the roof line question, let me go back actually to one of those pictures. This is pretty good. So on this particular example, which is in Southwest Longmont, you know, the higher visibility area obviously has more transparency where they have office space, customer entrances. They've also tried to incorporate some variation in terms of roof lines, particularly for the areas that front onto the public street. But as you see on this design, as, I don't know if I can, I guess I can. As you kind of look on the side of the building that goes towards the back, this is the north side of the building. It faces towards an electrical substation, so there isn't really anything to really buffer or create a design to that other adjacent use. And obviously that portion of the roof line is more continuous without breaks in that roof line. And then as you look on the back side of the building, or the rear where the loading docks are, it also backs to another industrial lot. Obviously, you know, I guess staff didn't feel that there was really a need for, you know, roof line variation since, you know, it wasn't facing a kind of a public street, a residential area, other mixed-use development. It was another industrial lot. It was a loading area. So that's kind of the intent. Obviously, the areas that are visible and need good design, that's where we want to encourage, you know, that roof line variation and the articulation, both the vertical and horizontal. So that's kind of where that came about in terms of looking at that particular standard. In terms of input, I know that there's been some local developers that have done a lot of development in Longmont that have provided, obviously they've gone through our review process a number of times and are currently going through our review process now. And so they've been somewhat vocal and provide a lot of good input on this particular topic. I think our staff has also had discussions with Longmont Economic Development Partners regarding this particular topic as well. And I don't know, Glenn, if there's anybody else you care to mention?
Yeah, on that, I have made a presentation to, I think, a real estate subgroup of the LADP. They have also done a study that's looked at our process, and this was an area that was identified as there's a high demand for it, we're building a workforce, yet we have a few barriers in our land development code that's slowing things down. So yes on all those. That's really what where we've gotten the input. Probably our customers the most.
Yep, tends to happen. Any other questions before I proceed on? I don't have too much more, I promise. All right, thank you. So in addition to the draft industrial building design standards There is also a new subsection C12, alternative design compliance. And so this has been added into the draft. And council, in our discussion in August, I believe, Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, because you were at that meeting and I wasn't. I think council is also interested in allowing more flexibility for appropriately quality design, alternative designs that could be approved administratively, provided the design meets the purpose and intent of the design standards, that is consistent with the building design use, orientation, placement, and location context. And in addition to this subsection C12 for alternative design compliance, we've also added in the draft some clarifying amendments regarding the administrative modifications section. That was at the tail end of the draft that was in your packet. So, I think this was a question that was brought up. So next steps, moving forward. You know, we're, like as I mentioned before, we're hoping to complete this year end if at all possible. You never know with the holidays and council meeting schedules. You know, the next step is to finish up the draft ordinance and review that with our legal staff. And then once that's completed, we would introduce the ordinance for first reading, and then there would be a public hearing and a second reading 2 weeks after that. And let's see, I've got one more slide, a few comments. So I appreciate the comments, questions, and input you've provided so far this evening. It's been really helpful. You know, we're not asking for necessarily specific language changes, but thank you, Commissioner Flagg, for your suggestion. Appreciate that. I just want to note staff will continue to explore options for making the code as intuitive and user-friendly as possible. I think we've also talked about opportunities to include additional graphics wherever possible, just to help explain particular design standards. So with that, that concludes my remarks. Happy to respond to any more questions, input that the commission may have this evening. Thank you.
I just have one more question. Is C12 going to add to the workload of our planning director? Is everybody going to see that and say, aha, have I got an idea and I want to talk to him? Just a thought.
Quite frankly, we're doing that now. So because there is a bit of flexibility, we are spending a lot of time on these buildings that I think, at least from the projects I've seen, they're not far off. And I think it would help streamline a lot of projects through. So, yeah, and I guess one alternative I'll just mention, there's a building that actually, it's been put on hold, but it was a recreation building, had a sloping roof that was one continuous line. And we have something about every 30 feet, there must be a couple of feet difference. Well, it just totally made that an ugly building. But that is a good example of an alternative that would be an easy yes on our end. So it just gives us that flexibility because we don't know every architectural design that's going to come in front of us. So you kind of know it when you see it, I guess.
And in spite of the alternative compliance section, you know, we're hoping that with a little bit more flexibility in the design standards for industrial buildings, that maybe we won't get as many requests. I'm good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, commissioners.
Okay, that is the other business. Next item is final call, public invited to be heard. I don't see anybody in the audience. Do we have, do we need to check the sign-in sheet? Okay, no sign-in sheet. So looks like I will go ahead and close final call, public invited to be heard. Next item is items from the commission. Commissioner Goldberg. Oh.
Thanks, Chairman. Hey, Glenn. At the beginning of our meeting, we heard from some members of the public about a few items that weren't on the agenda. Michelle Bennett called out, well, recognized that we have an Office of Emergency Management and expressed concerns about how much our residents know about OEM and, is it on our radar? And maybe do folks know to turn to OEM during disasters? And how do they find out how to safely evacuate our town if there's another flood? Now, given the fact that I was a resident during our flood, I was pinned to the OEM Twitter handle, all day for days, right? Like that was where I went. But this person was concerned that maybe that education isn't out there. Do we do any marketing for OEM? Do we how do we inform residents that there's this resource here that's kind of got your back in the case of a disaster, and we're gonna help you, we're gonna be your resource for information?
Sure, I'll look to my compatriots if they're aware. I've got 2 years at the city of Longmont, so thank God we haven't had a emergency, but I think they're always making improvements to the process. As far as, and I think she kind of brought it back to a specific project, and I'll just assure you that every project goes through police and fire for review for things like exiting and access to fire apparatus, that sort of thing. But as far as from a global scale, I don't know that I'm the right one that can give you a good answer of what we do.
Commissioner Goldberg and Planning Zoning Commission, I don't have much to add. I do know that Office of Emergency Management has an all hazards plan, but from the public facing side, I don't know what sort of marketing outreach that they do.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know either. But somehow during the disaster, I found out, and that was certainly my resource. I just wonder, what is the planning there on raising awareness for it? The last comment I have came from Chris Conklin, who asked about why and where we host neighborhood meetings. I think he was frustrated in particular because it was held online. I'm guessing that was a result of COVID when everything was online. But can you talk about where do neighborhood meetings actually occur? Are they in the library? Are they here?
Since COVID, we have not had a public neighborhood meeting. We've done everything online, and we've kept it that way for a couple of reasons. One is it's easier for staff. It's another night meeting. It's really the developers meeting. We are really the facilitator of it.
Sure.
And quite frankly, we've gotten very good input through them. I think the one that he mentioned, I think we had like 60 participants in that meeting. So I think it's actually quite an efficient way for a neighborhood meeting that is prior to any public hearing that would happen in this case. And that there would be a minimum of 3 public hearings that would occur on any project like that they're referring to. So I think it's a system that kind of works. Now, we could certainly gauge if it's something we think that there may be a couple of hundred people that may want to operate, then maybe we go to this mode and we meet in this room and perhaps use additional rooms. But neighborhood meetings, it's a first here, and they're looking at a very rough project. And then there's actually the code dictates that there has to be a period of time where we take that input seriously, and the developer tries to incorporate as many changes as possible.
Sure.
So it's really a working session. I think it works good virtually. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I largely agree. I think we probably have decades of precedent where they were actually held in person. Brian's probably hosted them before. Brian, where do they typically occur? In a library setting? In a library room or something?
Typically, they were held in any public facility
Got
that
it.
we could
Okay.
find.
Sure.
So whether that's a meeting room at a fire station
Sure.
or a library or wherever that might be. So,
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
but we do have the ability, we do have the pre-submittal neighborhood meeting requirement. If there was, we felt that it was appropriate and necessary, we do have the ability to require additional neighborhood meetings.
Yeah, I think maybe that's where I'm getting to. Thanks for that feedback, Brian. We pivoted to virtual for both city council meetings, P&Z meetings, and I'm sure many other meetings because of COVID. And we did the best we could, and we got really good at it. But even here in this meeting, we saw a serious drop in public invited to be heard or public engagement because it was less in your face. It was kind of annoying to try to call, and the process to be in queue was kind of clunky. The city did a great job, but you can tell that we're back in now because we see the value of being in person. And so I hear you that it's effective. That's great. And, and it's easier for staff, and maybe it even increases access for those who can't drive or get around easily. I think all those are great, but I wonder if there's a world where we say, this is an unusually, contentious project. Anyone would have guessed that Bond Farm was going to be a contentious topic, a hot topic. I wonder if in those scenarios we maybe see what participation is like in the virtual, and then, this thing really does warrant a follow-up. I don't know anything about the process. I don't want to be inserting, my opinion specifically, but I wonder if there's a time when we say, this really, triggers that benchmark or something that we should meet in person.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback onto that. So I assume that for those meetings, there's Zoom, and that to WebEx. Do they have to call in on a separate number if they want to comment? That, to me, that's the biggest issue that we've had, is the fact that the way the call-in works, I think people get frustrated. I can even see, especially something with the Bond Farms, if you get 15 people trying to call in, they're waiting in queue, the last 4 digits of your phone number really may not be the best way to prompt somebody. I mean, I think that kind of gets lost on people. That's my major concern with doing a meeting like that remotely, is just how easy is it for somebody to voice their opinions. So that for something, as you said, something like Bond Farm, maybe that's something where we may need to look at maybe being in person, just because of the amount of people, just be able to make sure that everybody can get their voice heard.
I want to chime in on the other side of that, because COVID was such an extreme thing, and there were lots of us that were dealing with elderly family members, and we needed to not be exposed ourselves. So if we should end up with the same kind of situation, perhaps what we do is most everybody is on Zoom, but we choose a space, a meeting hall space that has distance that can be applied, like, I think the athletic center, I don't know if I'm calling it the right thing, down there that's near the senior center, seems to have a large floor area. Perhaps we allow people who want to speak and chime in at the meeting to sit in those areas and have the seats spaced far enough that they feel safe enough. We can run fans. I don't know what it takes. But then they still have a way of having input. So we're doing a both and kind of thing. And maybe that's what we do the next time. But we cannot force people or even condone people to meet in a place where they could be at risk health-wise. That's not fair to anybody, I don't think. Thank you.
Any other? The other item that was mentioned was, and I don't know if this is under our purview or not, was the West End Tavern and parking. I know that's come up before, and I think it's come up before to City Council. I don't know if there's really anything for us to discuss about it, but just to kind of tie up the loose end there.
I'm a little nervous to talk about it because it could potentially end up on your docket. But what we're dealing with there is a non-conforming use. It is allowed to stay within certain parameters. If that changes and expands, it would potentially be a planning commission issue.
Oh, okay. Any other items from the commission? Items from Council Representative Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Chair Poland. First of all, I apologize for my absences. Post-COVID has been a very turbulent time for probably all of us, and has definitely been a turbulent time for the Rodriguez household. It's very good to be back here. I am eternally grateful to consider myself an alumnus of this body. So as always, thank you so much. You are probably, from my experience anecdotally, the most thorough body that I have had the privilege of sitting in on during decision-making processes, including the city council, really. Anyway, yeah, and so thank you very much for your service. You know, I've known most of you for many years, and then Commissioner Boone only just recently. You know, have you been? You know, probably a good while for you, but you know, I think 2015 was when I started, and the three of you were here before me, so still here. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to staff. I know you've all done great work. Glenn is fairly new, so it's always nice to hear what he kind of has to say. Bring that fresh perspective, if you will. Just on a couple items that were brought up tonight, the council is obviously very much aware of the concerns of the neighborhood surrounding Bond Farm, not just in the Bond Farm development proposal that is still obviously working its way through, but also the concerns about Westside Tavern. And we've heard plenty about that. Thank you so much for your input as far as the industrial design standards that are going to be brought forward. And yes, hopefully we can get them done this year. That'd be great. We'll see. But anyway, thank you all so much. And I'm sad to see that there's a few of our colleagues not able to join us tonight, but it was very nice to be back with you tonight. So thank you.
Okay. Items from Planning Director Glenn Van Nimwegen.
Good. I just want to let you know about a couple of other ordinances that are going to be appearing on the council agenda in regards to implementing the Main Street corridor studies. So as you know, there was some very specific recommendations. We're bringing those forward. One of them has to do with the land uses within the mixed-use commercial and mixed-use downtown that basically puts more restrictions on auto-related uses and drive-throughs, that sort of thing. That's coming a little bit later, I think in the beginning of November. But on Monday's agenda will be first reading of the parking code amendments in those two districts. That basically says for residential development, we are now going to a maximum standard versus a minimum standard. So I think that's kind of earth-moving in a lot of ways, and it'll be on first reading on Tuesday evening with City Council. So that was some good work with that Main Street program, and we're finally getting to implementing it now. So wanted to let you know about that. We did want to talk about that, didn't we? That completely escaped my mind. So yes, very good input. And the council would like your input. I think what we haven't done it with the Planning Commission yet, we did do it with Historic Preservation. In that instance, we only had 2 applicants and we did it in front of the full body. However, I think what we've seen with some of the other advisory board meetings that they've identified a subcommittee of 2 members with the liaison or the secretary. I don't know what the formal term is with the liaison, the staff liaison, to do those initial interviews and then bring them back to the full board for recommendation. Do we know, I know it was delayed, do we know how many candidates we have? We have 4. And a lot of them are some of your, some of the members that are being asked to be reappointed. So one thing you could do is, if you want to go that subcommittee route, is identify a couple of the planning commission members, and then it would probably be me that would do those initial interviews. And we'd have a little bit more flexibility then with when we actually do that interview. But then ultimately, we would come forward with December. It has to be done by December, right, Jane? So by your November meeting, we would have to come and get a recommendation of the full board.
I can get a, so what would be the proper way to create the subcommittee?
I think it could be as simple as, I think you could do it right now. If you want volunteers, or does the chair want to appoint, or I think it could be that easy, yeah. And make a motion and, yeah, pick the ones who aren't here. That would be fair.
That would be perfect.
So I'll ask the 3 other members and me over here if anybody would be interested in being on the subcommittee.
Yeah, she can't really serve, but that would be.
I will say I will be. And commission.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I feel it appropriate to nominate our chair to be the our representative for helping select our newest members.
If we don't get a second one now, is there a procedure to do this offhand, or should we? Commissioner Flake.
I would nominate Commissioner Teta. I think he'd be good. And that's why, not because he's not here.
Okay. Commissioner Boone.
I just have a question. I think there's 5 openings, and we have 4 applicants.
That's it.
But 2 are permanent seats and 3 are alternate. So there is a distinction between who you nominate for what.
We're still going to be short 1 person without additional applicants, right? Okay.
Depending on whether they're willing to serve as alternates.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have, I'll make a motion that Chairperson Michael Bowen and Commissioner Chris Petta form a subcommittee to do the interviews for applicants for next year for the Planning and Zoning Commission. I move that Chairperson Mike Poland and Commissioner Chris Teta form a subcommittee to handle the interviews for the applicants for the Planning and Zoning Commission for next year. Should we get a second on that then? Yes.
I will second that motion.
Okay, we have the motion, we have a second. As there's no further discussion, let's call for a vote.
Vice Chairman Goldberg? Yes. Chairman Poland? Yes. Commissioner Flake? Aye. Commissioner Boone? Yes. Chairman, that passes 4-0.
Very good. I think that has completed our business. Nothing further, Glenn? Okay, then I will put us into adjournment.